Alright, we're officially recording. Halfway decent sized turnout. I thank y'all for coming. I know Gremlin obviously has been tanking for a long time. Ariana tanking for a long time. Myself, I don't remember a time when I didn't or heal. Wait, we're talking about healing, right? Okay. I'm on the
But I
right
have
page.
tanked for a long time.
I haven't tanked nearly as long as I have healed, but I do tank every once in a while. Zek, Zen, Sai, Catalonia, welcome. And then there's Black. Black, do you have a healer?
No, I just stopped by to say hi.
And no. Uh, with all the new core teams and open trials going, I've noticed that a lot of healers are falling through the cracks and maybe not necessarily getting the training they deserve. And that generally turns out bad for Incurable Insanity when we get under prepared healers, underutilized healers, or just healers that may or may not have the actual skill to do some of the content we want to push. My first word of advice is never just consider yourself a healer. You are technically a support role. You'll spend probably more time debuffing and buffing your group than you will actually putting out heals. Now, all our DPS are required, in most cases, to run a self-heal. So if their health gets so low that they start to panic, then they're just going to hit their self-heal. Keeping up buff up times is almost more important than keeping everybody alive. Especially when you take into account that probably about half of the damage that comes in ESO trials is a one-shot. Because that's a great idea. Now, I don't necessarily know what classes you all play. Every class plays a little bit different when it comes to healers, but the general premise is the same. Your most used skill is going to be combat prayer. Generally, I lay down healing springs, combat prayer. If I'm on my Templar, I'll put down a ritual or an orb, and then I'll go back to combat prayer. I do 90% of my healing through combat prayer, unless everybody's spread out.
Can I ask a question there, quick?
Sure.
So, are you saying that you kind of do a rotation when you heal?
I only heal by rotation. Unless it is an emergency where we're going to take huge spike damage, like, we're in Cloud Rest and someone accidentally pointed the boss towards the group. Well, then we're going to take an increased amount of damage and I'll deviate from the rotation. But a perfect opportunity to heal on a rotation would be like the execute in VCR, where we're taking constant damage. You can just heal on a rotation, and if someone dies, unfortunately someone dies. But to conserve magic, keep buff up times, and keep everyone with a moderate amount of health, yes, I heal on a rotation.
Well, that makes sense. Thanks.
I have no
Good
idea.
way to keep your buffs and stuff up as well. Similar to how you would DPS. So that'll kind of ensure once you get used to your cooldowns on your skills. Just
Yep.
kind of muscle memory.
Exactly. And if
then
you
you
need
learn the
help
content.
creating a rotation, don't be afraid to ask. We can come up with one based on your class. So another thing I want to touch base on really quick is Evan, one of our our officers put together a giant spreadsheet with a plethora of information in it, and it can be found pinned in the Healer Discord. It is an Excel spreadsheet, but if you have Google Docs, you can upload it there and open it that way, or make changes using Excel. I personally don't have Excel, so I just use Google Spreadsheets. But it has the multitude of tabs, including, gear sets, abilities by class. So pretty much Evan has taken it upon himself to come up with what your standard bar would look like for each class. He has Mundus Stone information, class specific passives, all listed, foods, pots. He has a section for CP. I know Grem posted CP in Discord as well. I actually follow Grem's listed CP. I don't know if she came up with that or someone else
No,
did, but
that would, yeah.
it actually has seemed to work out better.
It's old from when the CP system came out and might have been put together possibly by Skinny, but they've also added new CP slots, which kind of gives you some other options depending on content. But it's not a bad baseline.
Fair enough. He has a list for add-ons. Not all his listed add-ons are required. They definitely help. Like I use Alpha Gear. I forgot what the other variation of Alpha Gear is called, but some people use that. Codes.
Dressing room.
Yes, dressing room. There you go. Most of our healers run Hodor reflexes so we can see your ultimates. We don't really care about your DPS. We just want to know when you have a horn available. Now, that add-on itself seems to work most of the time. Sometimes it gets buggy and it won't show one person, and you'll generally have to log out or reload your UI. But that one's always important. But the most important part of Evan's spreadsheet is the last tab has a checklist for all the sets that we generally use for healing. I don't think it's been updated with the most recent sets, but it's got everything from Evan Armory to Zen's. And you can just literally check them off as you get them, or if you get them in your sticker book. And then as you run trials in our groups, you're going to constantly be asked what sets you have available, and it's just a quick reference so you always know what you have rather than having to search through your bank or inventory insight. You can know just by looking at the list if you can run, Roaring Opportunist and Zens or Worm and Torix. You can automatically know. And that includes our monster sets from Chokethorn, Earthgore. Most of our healers run Symphony of Blades now because why not help other people keep their resources? And then of course the four staffs, whether it's Maelstrom, Asylum, Resto, or the BRP, which is I think Force Overflow. All those have their uses in certain categories. Does anybody have any specific QR questions?
I do have a question about gear and specifically monster sets.
Sure.
When I look at guides, for example, Allcast or one that Lyco has posted, they for healers they have the monster set usually a heavy and medium, and everything else is light. Is that what you do, or I know for mag DPS now the meta is all light, but I don't know what it is for healers.
That's taking advantage of undaunted passives.
Okay.
that'll give you for each weight, it'll give you 2% additional health, magicka, and stamina for a total
Okay.
6%. So that's
Okay.
pretty much it.
All right.
6% across the board for. Yeah. I generally also run one heavy, one medium. My Symphony of Blades are too heavy. I wouldn't, don't panic if you don't have, one medium, one heavy, but it definitely helps. 6% of 220K is, you get an extra, 1800 health.
Yeah.
So that may or may not help you not get one-shotted.
Yeah, that's well. Thank you. That makes sense. I do have heavy and medium for effectively all the monster sets I have, and was wondering if I had to farm light.
I wouldn't,
Yeah.
unless something drastically changes. I don't think they'll change the way Undaunted works. So
Yeah.
you'll always get that 6%.
What Mundus do you recommend, like, having on?
So it's funny because I made a joke about that in last night's raid. It ultimately it depends on your class. If you're a Nightblade healer, I know a lot of Nightblade healers run Thief for the extra crit. A majority of healers run Atronach for Magicka recovery. I think it all ultimately comes up to preference. However, the caveat is no healer should ever run the ritual. Ritual will indeed give you, I think it's up to 12% additional healing done if you're in full Mundus gear. But as it stands in, every trial I've ever ran is like 60% of all heals are over heals.
Yeah, overhealing is a problem in EOSO.
So you're literally just wasting that Mundus and wasting your time if you're just healing for the sake of healing, which is where buff up times become a higher priority. Is if all you're doing is spamming your healing springs to keep everybody at 100% health, chances are that buff times are going to drop. And I don't know how, Ariana or Gremlin instruct newer healers, but I just put a huge focus on buff up times. If all 12 people in your group have combat prayer, that means that all 12 people get an additional 5% damage, and that stacks on top of other buffs that we have going out. So if a DPS walks in with 25k DPS in a good optimized group with good support roles, they're actually probably hitting closer to 50 on a stack and whack fight. Now, obviously, you got to take into account that they're going to be moving around for various trials, but more importantly, getting them as much buff uptime as possible. In terms of buff uptimes like combat prayer, I'd like to see nothing lower than 80% uptime. And that goes for if they're running Zens. I don't think there's any reason why someone can't hit 80% uptimes on all their debuffs and buffs. And that includes if you're the healer that's responsible for wearing Elemental Drain, which is a huge one for Mage Regen. One healer in the group will always run that. If you're running Zens, then your back bar obviously looks much different than, say, the group healer, who might just have a Destro on their back bar with blockade and a couple other skills. But if you're wearing Zens, they have a full DPS back bar with nothing but dots on it. it varies. Another thing I like to train is using Warhorn over other alties. I know necromancers love to drop Colossus, and a lot of newer healers like Barrier because it can give them a reprieve from having to heal. But if you heal on a rotation, that shouldn't be a problem. And Warhorn is astronomically better in terms of getting your DPS to do more damage. The fight will end sooner. If you have 4 support roles all running Barrier on cooldown, then you can easily make a difference. I know Wardens sometimes run trees. Ultimately, we want to train all our healers to use Barrier, or not Barrier, Warhorn, unless talked to accordingly. There are some fights where, hey, we want a Barrier at this point, so you won't then use your Warhorn, but you'll hold your Barrier.
So I have a question about the Black Rose Prison resto staff. There are some places where it's good and not, and I'll have to say I haven't figured that out yet.
Sunfire Tomb Healing.
Yeah, I was about to say the only place I actually use my Black Rose Resto would be VSS.
Yeah.
Okay.
When a
Tomb
DPS
healing.
goes into the tomb, they take a lot of damage. It drops them to I forget what the
Yeah.
actual percentage is, like 10 or something
I
percent.
think it's
So
10 or
you
15.
usually, yeah.
Yeah.
So you pop your healing ward. So that's the thing is you need your healing ward on your BRP staff. Otherwise, there's no point in running it if you don't have the ward because it only
Okay.
procs off the ward. So you DPS goes in, you pop the ward, and then you start spamming your like burst heal and but in advance like have springs and orb going towards the tomb just to give you a little bit of help too.
So you and Blitz have used the term spring. Is that illustrious healing? Is that what you're talking about? Is the
Yep.
spring?
So it's
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Illustrious Healing or Healing Springs is the alternate morph of that.
Okay.
Springs is
Okay.
more of a sustain morph, and illustrious is just a bigger heal. I think it
Okay.
lasts longer.
Let me check
I'd
real
have to
quick.
double check because I can't remember some of
Yeah,
these things.
illustrious healing lasts for 12 seconds.
Yeah, so
Yeah, and
probably
Healing
last.
Springs last for 8, but you give everybody in that circle 30 magicka every time an ally is ticked. Or
Okay. So you would recommend that over illustrious healing?
I personally, yes. It all
Okay. I mean,
depends on if you're in a situation where you would need more healing. If I know that's one of the skills I swap out based on group composition and what we're running. If I'm
okay.
healing the group in VCR, I know during execute I'm going to need all the help I can get. And that's one of those instances where you would want bigger heals.
So just to clarify, Healing Springs only returns magic back to you, which is why I typically just tend to run Illustrious.
That's true.
Yeah, it'd be the master's resto that could give sustain to your
Oh,
group.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
So
I do
yeah.
like my master resto every once in a while, but
So
Yeah,
I usually go
that's
with illustrious because it does last longer, so I don't have to cast it as often. So it kind of helps a little bit.
yeah. I haven't. I don't have a master's resto yet. I need to get that.
see, I
That's
like the
okay, I don't
timing
either.
on healing springs better than illustrious because then I can keep combat prayer and illustrious on the same
Mm.
same circuit because
So
they're both
it's
8 seconds.
yeah, both HA. Yeah, at least for sustain, I've been with my warden healer, been using enchanted growth, which um, increases magic and stamina recovery.
Yeah, that one's good.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah,
That's a good one when you're bringing a warden into the group. They can keep that up on the group.
yeah,
You had to
and I
cast it twice, like combat prayer, to actually hit a whole raid group.
yeah I've been doing that, and it's been working out well. I think I was doing it a couple of nights ago, and I was doing it last night actually as well.
That and the expansive cloak to give your group major resolve as well. Those are
Yeah.
2 really good ones to try and keep up when you're running your warden.
Yeah, I'll have to admit that I'm still working on my healing rotation on the ward. There's so many opportunities to buff, do good things.
And you have an excellent point. And while I love my Templar healer, the strength of a warden comes from the fact that it can bring far more to a group than just healing. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Ariana, who I believe just opened up a stream on Discord, and will go over a healing rotation.
Yeah, so I play a pretty vanilla Templar. I mean, and there's some, back and forth over, which is, what's the best healer you can play. I mean, the answer is it depends on your group. Same with sets. I mean, as Blitz said, there's no real right or wrong answer, and I know in groups that we've tend to put together, we'll sometimes combine different healers. Like we'll have a Warden and a Templar running, or we'll have like a a Necro and a Warden, just because each class can provide different passive buffs. For a while, like Templars were really wanted because they have quick reses and they also have easy access to minor fracture with Power of the Light. And some of that's gone away now because of the way that penetration works on tanks. But it's still can be good for like Power of the Light and stuff. But so I'll show you a quick demonstration of what I tend to do as a healing rotation. So hopefully you guys can see my bar setup here. This is a pretty generic setup. You'll notice I almost always will have a shield somewhere on my bar. And that is because for me, it is more important for me to stay alive than to um, keep up any one individual or any individual skill or buff. Basically the adage is, if your healer's dead, if you're dead, you're not doing any heals or buffs or debuffs or anything. So as a general kind of heal / buff uptime, what I'll generally do is in a group is, I'll lay down an extended ritual. And extended is preferable now over the retribution, which used to provide more heals, but now it provides no heals. So this provides really good purify synergy to everyone in your group, and also some really good just like healing over time. And then I'll probably start by dropping a couple combat prayers. And the thing with combat prayer is it hits 6 people in front of you in a cone. But sometimes you'll have to cast it once or twice. Sometimes your group isn't stacked very well, so you, especially like in Maul, you have groups that are kind of staggered. So you'll have to kind of do this weird little casting people sort of in front of you, to the side of you, and then over here. I almost always try to keep this down as well, because it gives me a ton of extra resistance, and while standing at it goes to about 8k additional resistance. So while keeping this down, ritual down, drop an orb, and I generally try to throw this down as well if we don't have a warden in the group that is providing that lifesteal passive for minor toughness. I'll drop this down on a group, drop a couple combat prayers as needed, and then I might just do this to hit anybody that maybe is not, and this is radiant regen. I see a lot of people cast this a lot. And the thing is, you don't necessarily want to overuse this. It does hit a lot of people that are, around you, and it targets the lowest health people, which is why I tend to just run it once or twice just to hit some people that I've either missed or people that are really low. I can sort of top them up. but otherwise I don't. I try not to overuse it. So I'll cast it when the rest of my stuff is down. So it'll be something like this. Combat prayer. Toss one of these, and then I'll do a couple of these until I need to pop another orb. Otherwise, I'm either combat praying or I'm dropping another orb. The thing with orbs is, in this utility, this comes from bandits. This tells me like what my timers are on all my abilities and buffs, what's being kept up. But there's a similar add-on if you don't want to run bandits or you use LUI or AUI. It is called Action Duration Reminder. And it'll just basically tell you what the uptime of your stuff is. So when you swap bars, you can see, okay, I have a couple seconds left in my orb before it expires. But generally, you probably want your orbs to be up a little bit higher than what it recommends, because this is until the orb actually disappears. But sometimes your DPS are on these staggered synergies, so they can only accept an orb once every 20 seconds. If you just popped an orb out, you may have had some DPS that were on the timer, but they'll be ready to get it now, as opposed to 5 seconds from then. So I generally try to pop an orb about every 5 seconds or so.
Yeah, that sounds
So
about right.
I keep really busy. I mean, there's just always something you can do.
Do you
Yeah, go ahead.
use shards for sustain at all as a Templar?
You, you know, I generally don't. And the reason for that is shards and orbs share the same cooldown timer. So if you toss a shard out and someone picks it up, they then cannot pick up an orb.
Okay.
So you're kind of like duplicating the synergy there, and only one person can get a shard, whereas anybody who's near to that orb can pick it up and heals.
Now, the
Yeah.
only time that I do prefer shard over a orb is in VAA. If there's a tank on the what's commonly known as the
Yes.
tank rock, orbs will not make it there. So you can directly throw that shard onto the rock and your tank can get resources.
DSS as well when you have your off tank in the back, because your orb
Yeah.
travel's so slow
Oh,
now.
Yeah.
So
that's
you
a good
would,
point. Yeah.
yeah, you would toss the shard back to like the off tank, and then you could push an orb maybe towards your other tank, or if you think your shard to be faster for the other tank, they can. You might be
Well,
using Templar shards on your
oh,
tanks just because your orb moves a little slow.
yeah, that's where my question came from. I was group healer in a Sunspire last night, before Blitz's thing, and um, I shards on the tank and off tank, and orbs on the group.
And Vast probably as well when you're kite healing. It's the
Yeah,
safest way to probably get resources to your main tank.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of other things that you could also run, and things that I've run in different trials, for providing more synergies and more buffs, this is the skill called Shadow Silk. Especially if you have a lot of stam DPS, the synergy deals a lot of poison damage, and anyone can hit it that's far enough away. So if you are not super close to your group, like if you're running kite heals and like say VCR, I will do a lot of spiders. Like I'll just toss it on like Zamaja while I'm kiting, and then I can hit group like this, run close to group, get in a couple combat prayers, and then I just lay down this while I'm kiting around. Um, drop an orb to group, drop more spiders. Um, Another thing that you can do, someone mentioned VAA. You can run this skill called Ring of Preservation. This is really good if your group is really stacked or there's someone that you want to supply with some additional stam regen. So it supplies healing, stam regen, and some extra minor protection. So it gives a little bit more resistance that they wouldn't get from like major protection.
And that's a fighter
So
skilled skill, correct?
yes, it is a fighter skilled skill. So under Fido skilled, Ring of Preservation. Another thing you could run in your group depending is this skill called Bone Shield. Sometimes your tank will probably be running it, so there might be some overlap. You'll have to coordinate with your tank to see kind of what they're running. But in groups where there's just a ton of incoming damage, like I can think of like the Protectorate fight in VHOF, I will often drop this because the group needs to be kind of really stacked on top of one spot, but there's a ton of incoming meteor damage. So I'll drop this as well as Bone Surge, so everybody can get that synergy, and then I'll pop my shield so that I'm not taking, a ton of damage. And then I'll just, keep these up. And you'll notice the other thing is this bar is called GCD bar, Global Cooldown. So you can do one ability every second. That's the cooldown. You'll also notice that there is some similarities between DPSing and healing. I tend to weave, so I'm actually light attacking between every ability. And that's important because it helps you regenerate ulti as well as it helps provide some dots if you're running some stuff on your enchantments on your stabs, which I highly recommend. I don't think Crusher's being quite used as much as it used to be. It still can be good though if you're not getting quite enough pen from your tanks or they're not wearing Alkosh. So that helps to proc all those enchantments, as well as like if you're wearing Zen, you want to be getting down as many dots as possible, and light attacks definitely help with that.
Yep, my actual preferred setup is Zen's and Spell Power Cure, or Olorime, depending on the group. But you should, especially if you have a DPS alt, I find that it's really effective to just train yourself to always be weaving. Even my tank weaves. Now I know my wife prefers to stand and tank, and that's fine, and that works for a lot of tanks. She's very tanky, and I would never tell her otherwise. But I tend to weave just because I play so much DPS that it's just secondhand that I automatically start weaving when I hit skills.
Yeah, same. Another thing that you can also wear, most healers will often run a lightning staff on your front bar or back bar, depending on how you do it. I tend to run front bar, some kind of DPS ability, and then back bar resto staff, but that's me. Is Ellie Blockade. This is really, really great because it helps keep off balance. So you just drop this down, and this is unstable wall of elements, so it blows up at the end. And again, it's not really for the DPS, it's to help buff your DPS. So this is providing some status effects like concussed as well as charged and off balance. So you just can keep this down while you're doing your other healing abilities. And then I actually run the Thief for more crit. So I actually have to heavy attack quite often. The nice thing about heavy attacking with a resto staff is it gives you major mending for 3 seconds. So like when I'm tomb healing, what I will do to heal tombs is if, I'm usually standing toward the back. I don't need to be necessarily buffing group as much because there's a healer up there, but I may cast a healing springs up at the group. And I'm usually close enough, because this is 28-meter range. I'm usually close enough to throw one of these down and it will hit people in line there. And usually sometimes the tank will be at the back, so I'll sometimes just buff the tank and give them an orb or two. And as soon as the it gets ready for a tomb, I will heavy attack boss, so I have that major mending up. And then I'll run over to the tomb, cast a couple ground AoEs, so healing springs, a ritual, and then as soon as the person gets in there, I'll float an orb by and I will just spam combat prayer. And that's all you need to do. And they will pop right up to the top. You'll be amazed like how fast that happens. You apply all these down. And you won't need to do breath of life spamming, anything like that. In fact, I don't tend to even run breath of life anymore. I will run it in dungeons sometimes. So I actually have a little bit of a separate dungeon setup. And the reason for that is because I tend to run a little bit more DPS heavy. So I'll show what that looks like real quick.
Well, he's getting that set up. As far as trials are concerned, Breath of Life is crutch. And if I see that you are running it, I'll probably, joke about it. But there's definitely far better skills for you to run rather than an emergency heal. Whether it's orbs or there's always something. God, Ariana, you should drink. Your tune's getting all alerted and shit.
So I have been running a somewhat similar skill on my Warden of budding seeds, but it's not so much. I've been using it just as a routine to when there's a lot of damage. I don't know if that's appropriate, or you think I should be doing something different.
So,
It's another AoE heal unless you cast it a second time for a burst.
Yeah, well, I'm casting it twice for a burst, per your suggestion, Gremlin.
That's only if you need to in the specific content. Otherwise, it's just another ground heal. Like,
Okay,
because right now, like when I'm progging VCR's Kite Healer, I'm putting Springs and Budding down because we have Hoarfrost, and people who are taking ticks of Hoarfrost damage
yeah,
need to constantly have heals on them. So we have all our AoEs down around the group. And then if a tank gets baned, that's how I help to burst heal them out to get them out of bane as quickly
mhm,
as possible. But otherwise, you don't necessarily double cast it just because you just kind of leave it as a ground AoE unless you have something
okay,
else you can run.
yeah, and to further that point is if you only cast it once, it also acts as a synergy, especially for your tanks who might be running Alkosh or
Yeah,
need a
that's true.
little extra resource, so they hit a synergy, which is another undaunted passive. So having that synergy available is always a good thing. So if your group's not taking a lot of damage, I would just cast it once, so it's doing, an AOE heal.
okay.
But if you need that emergency heal, yes, I would cast it a second time and use it to get the group back up to full.
Yeah, definitely great points. So for people that are more interested in like maybe dungeon healing, so it's a little bit different in dungeon healing. I generally try to tell people it's like new healers, it's not your job to keep everybody alive. It's not even your job to keep most people alive. Your job is to keep yourself alive, buff group, and then put out heals. And generally, also that doesn't include resing either. DPS should be resing in 99% of the cases. If you need to, mention that to your raid leader, or if you're in a dungeon group, mention that, hey, DPS, you guys need to be resing so I can be healing and putting out buffs. So what I will tend to do in a dungeon is run more of a DPS-oriented setup, because that, there's only 2 DPS. It really can help, especially if you're in a lower group DPS. There are times when I've been doing 50% of the DPS in a group as a healer. So I'll throw down just some quick heal over times. So this hits 3 people, so that gets all my group members. And then I just start DPSing. So I go in with jabs, and this is Templar specific, but depends on your setup. I just jab until I need to toss out some more heals. And again, combat perf for the win. I mean, and then I use shards because they do an incredible amount of DPS, surprisingly, as well as providing synergies. Heavy attack if I need sustain back. And one other thing that I see a lot of healers do in trials and in dungeons is casting Ellie Drain. Ellie Drain is great for sustain, but Ellie Drain has changed a little bit. It used to provide minor breach, and now it actually provides major breach. which is actually the same as what the tank is already applying. So if you look at one-handed shield for Pierce armor, it applies major and minor breach. So it kind of deems Ellie Drain a little bit redundant. So where I'd recommend casting Ellie Drain if you're going to run it is not on like main boss, for instance, but is on debuffing ads, because the tank can't always puncture every single ad that pops up. So that's where it can be great to just toss Ellie Drain on like the grapes and VCR,
Yeah.
or other
Creepers
ads
and-
that pop up. Yep, creepers, anything you see that pops up that like the tank can't get to. This is going to debuff spell wise and physical wise. And in dungeons too, there's a lot of ads. Or sometimes you may be running with a tank that is running ransack and doesn't have access to that major fracture. And this is a good place to start. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, just sit there in DPS. I mean, so that's
So,
about all I had. Any questions?
yeah, I never question. I've been asked to run Blood Altar recently on a couple of occasions. And is this something that you run routinely, or really depends on the raid lead to ask for
content maybe.
the content? Okay.
Yeah, because it provides a synergy to like give people a lot of health when they synergize with it. So like VCR, especially
Yeah.
when tank gets baned, they can utilize synergy from an altar to help get them out of bane,
It
or the grape kind
Yeah.
in general. But
it's definitely always good for one support role, whether it's a tank or a healer, to
Okay.
to have it out, because like Gremlin just said, it's a great emergency heal. Now that being said, it can also be used as kind of a long lasting heal over time. I think overflowing lasts 30 seconds and sanguine altar lasts 40 seconds, and that will give minor life steal to all the enemies in the area, and it'll heal that ally every 1 second when they hit it with damage. So it's a very small heal, but it's definitely worth having out, whether or not they're utilizing that small lifesteal heal, more so for the emergency heal that the tank will most likely utilize, or if a DPS accidentally steps in the wrong spot and takes a lot of damage really quick, that synergy will automatically pop up, I think, when they get below 30% health, and they can automatically hit it really quick and they're saved.
I think they removed even the because I was just looking at it to check. I think it used to be it was under 50% health, but I think now you can, on the tooltip at least, it doesn't actually give a cap. It's just you can activate the synergy for 65% of your max health. So it's a little bit nerfed. It used to be, I think it was like 85 or 90%.
I'm not sure. I don't think it becomes available automatically. I know at you at least have to take some amount of damage for it to pop up. I don't remember exactly what the threshold is, but I know that the synergy will not pop up at all if you are full health.
Yeah, you're probably right. And traditionally it was 50%. So it probably is the same. They probably just missed it off the tooltip. But
mm-hmm.
yeah, like you'll notice on 50% of my setups, I have overflowing altar somewhere. And that's just because it's such a great thing to have down. I mean, besides, if we have a warden in the group that's already putting it down, I won't run it because the warden's going to give a better passive with minor toughness.
I don't think it procs
Otherwise,
off the altar anymore,
Yeah, it doesn't proc off the
because
altar.
it's effectively the DPS almost healing themselves by attacking rather than direct heals from the warden.
Yeah, and
sure.
you don't get any credit as a warden or anybody for as a healer for the blood altar and what it heals.
No.
You don't get any credit
Not
for the synergy. So like
yeah,
even orbs will go to the person who popped them, not to
yeah.
you.
Not that I necessarily look for the credit. It's just how do you keep people alive? Good.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sure.
And
And
that
I think like,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just gonna say again about altar. I mean, the biggest reason I run it is, it's a 30-second thing you can slap down and almost forget about. and it heals for 28 meters.
Yeah.
I've sometimes have seen healers running in Restoring Light. I've seen them running like Rite of Passage or Healing Ritual, or some of these like less common things. But you notice they heal for like 10 meters for a lot of health, but 10 meters is less than even the range of this. That's like here to
Yeah.
like there.
Yeah.
So whereas, I can pop this down and this will heal almost an entire arena while I'm doing other stuff. So
Yeah.
that's just me though.
I absolutely love large heal over time spells, whether it's the Templar's Extended Ritual, Warden's Budding Seeds, Altar, anything that can cover as much distance as possible and keep everybody topped off while I do other things. Especially when it comes to me specifically. In most cases, if I'm playing my healer, I'm leading the trial as well. So that adds that extra step of I need to always see what's going on, know what's next, where everybody is, keeping everybody topped off, and yet still also doing my job. And that brings me to something that I don't want everybody to get a big head about, but as a support role, as a healer, you have the right to tell someone if they need to move. Or if you see them taking extraordinary amounts of damage, you can be like, hey, what the fuck, Scottus? Why are you taking so much damage? Like, Scottus, why do you keep dying? And then chances are it's because he's not standing in your heels. You'll see it a lot in Maw because everybody has a fixed position that they should always be at in Maw, with the exception of, maybe twins, but even twins, you should still be in a general area and you'll catch your DPS kind of, standing in the back or off to the side. Well, not only are they not getting heals, but chances are they're not getting combat prayer, which is lowering their DPS. If someone is not in formation, advise them, politely of course, unless you're me, to get back into their spot. Or in Maw, hey, Fiverr, move up a little bit. You're out of position. Ariana, come in a little bit. While you might not be the raid leader, your overall group will rely on the healers to tell them if they're out of position. Make
Yeah,
sense?
100%.
Yep. No raid leader is gonna yell at you for telling someone to get in the right spot. If they do, well, just tell them to be quiet, politely. Some raid leaders don't like being talked over, etc. I get that to some extent, but no one has a better view than the healer, because all the DPS should be in front of the healer at all times anyways, otherwise you're not getting combat prayer.
And I take a little bit of a different approach than some healers. I prefer to be kind of up close and personal. And I know that for a lot of things that we end up doing, were especially like stack and whack fights. A lot of healers, like if this is the group up there, that statue, a lot of healers will want to like stand back here and, I guess, and it's a more gentle approach to make sure they get everybody. Me, I'm, up here and I'm like, like Blitz said, don't be afraid to, if you're behind me, you're not getting heals. I mean, sometimes you just kind of have to say that. Like if your group is there and you have someone standing behind you, just be like, hey, person behind me, like you need to get up here with the group. And you can do it gently, of course. You don't need to, yell at someone or scream at them, but just kind of make them understand that, like, hey, I'm going to be doing the best heals that I can while I'm up here, up close and personal to my group, so I can make sure I can see what's going on. Especially combat prayer can be kind of janky. It can sometimes like not proc on people if you're not close enough, or so I just, prefer to be up closer where I can make sure that I'm hitting everybody. So yeah, don't be afraid to kind of tell people to
Yeah,
adjust a little bit.
I think that's an excellent point too. I see all the time is healers that are maybe 5 meters behind, 6 meters back. It's like combat prayer, as far as I know, it starts at your feet.
Yep.
So you, as long as you're even one step behind the DPS, then you're hitting them.
I have found that, because the range on combat prayer is exactly the same radius as healing springs, if you cast a healing springs and then you put yourself at one end and you put your tank at the other, essentially your DPS in theory should be in the middle of that circle and you'll catch all 12 people on a stack and whack fight with combat prayer and healing springs. As long as you obviously want to get your tank on one end, say the boss, and then all the DPS is if you're standing in your own healing springs, everybody is within range. And that brings up another point is you should always be standing in your own healing springs. If for no other reason than you have passive healing on yourself, which means you will not die. And if you die, chances are 2 or 3 other people will die because of lack of heals. So I always make sure that I'm at my own edge of my healing springs. And that might take a little time for you to get used to, finding the position of your healing springs and always knowing where to point. But generally, I will always cast my healing springs so I am standing in it.
Yeah, and I think for me, what I see, it of course is mostly in dungeon content, but that's one thing that I notice a lot. If the healer gets too far back behind the DPS, then a lot of times that will cause the boss to jump or do something that will take him out of all the AoEs that are there. Which is why I always hope the healer's standing right on my back.
It's a fair assessment.
I'm in a MA progression group, and on the twins, I've been telling folks that the DPS is not grouping well enough. It just drives me nuts. And I'm trying to buff them and heal them. But anyhow, I do have going back to the checklist, which is a great spreadsheet, by the way. I didn't know it existed. And the sets that are listed. Uh, there are a number of sets there that I do not have. And should my goal be to have all of that?
Eventually, yes. And that, kind of moves us into what Incurable Insanity requires from its healers. We don't ever expect you to have every set until you get Valkyrie status, which is our highest level of non officers in the guild. And that means literally that you can do everything. You have all the skills unlocked, you have all the gear sets unlocked. Not all those sets are even optimal anymore. You don't see too many healers running Winter's Respite or Martial Knowledge, which I consider to be one of the most important buff sets in the game, but it's really hard to use as a healer. So we don't expect brand new healers who join the guild to have Martial Knowledge. But what we do expect are the ones that are used on a regular basis, whether it's Spell Power Cure or Olorame, because that needs to be present in every group in one method or another. Whether it is the Spell Power Cure, which is great for non-stack and whack fights, or Olo, which you then place on the ground and all your DPS get the buff as long as they're standing in it. That generally gets paired with Hollow Fang, and all the other veteran healers feel free to pipe in if you disagree or agree. But those two are generally found in every trial.
I think I have a
Yorvolds, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I think I have a general preference more for my experience with groups not always stacking well, but I've taken a preference for SPC over Olo just because it has no cooldown and it procs just on healing. So as long as your group is being healed, they get the buff.
Exactly.
It's just constantly procking. Olo, I think, is kind of nice because it's on the ground, and I think it can, in theory, last longer. But you do kind of want like to keep track of it so you can proc it properly. And there's a lot of ground abilities that will proc it in weird places. So having a tracker so you can time it is helpful.
Yep.
But SBC, you don't have as much stress for that one.
Yeah, Olo's great for stack and whack fights because, Gremlin is absolutely right. You can have more uptime with Olo. But if your group's not stacked on a regular basis, then Olo is not going to be worth it and you want to move to Spell Power Cure. I know when Olo first came out, a huge problem we had in almost all our trials was you would see Olo on the ground and you could literally watch DPS run out of formation through damage just to get the Olo buff. Because DPS are so obsessed with getting their buffs and getting their high numbers that they would risk their life for spell power cure buffs. So I also am with Graham and I run spell power cure more than I run Olo.
So one question I have is about Hollowfang versus Stone Taker. I've been particularly in mixed groups with Stam and Magicka. I've been sort of leaning towards Stone Taker, and I don't know what you guys think about that.
It is a newer set, so I've kind of taken to it as well because it restores both magicka and stamina, and it's in a 15-meter radius around the target you've heavy attacked.
Yeah.
So when it explodes, it's kind of nice, and you can proc it after each other. So if you have like an exo set proc tracker add-on that I use, it puts a little symbol on my screen, so I heavy attack and I can see when it's counting down to when it explodes. So you can time it, so you can minimize the downtime since it doesn't have a cool it you proc it, it counts down for 10 seconds, and then it has like 10-second cooldown. So there's no real cooldown on that skill, but it does restore more resources than Hollowfang would. I think I was looking at it recently because I wanted to double check, but my Stone Talker says it restores more magicka than even Hollowfang does, and I've also been a little disappointed with Hollowfang with where it decides to proc, because it might proc on me for some reason when I'm kite healing her. If I'm running, like if I have to run away from the group, and it might proc on me, or it might proc in the on the off tank and Sunspire for some reason, just because they happen to catch a heal and it decided to go out there. So Stone Talkers you can control, which I think I kind of like a bit more. It does require heavy attack, but I mean, you do that on your resto, you get some more resources back, and you proc major mending. Kind of works out.
So yeah, like to go along with what Grim said, it can proc more stamina and magicka, which is nice, as opposed to Hollowfang that only does magicka. It can also be less too, though. So it depends on, because it's 5% of the damage that your heavy attack, that the bomb explodes as it goes off, which is up to 2240, which is more than Hollowfang, at its max. But it is really nice though, because like Grim said, I mean, I've noticed Hollowfang a lot of times will proc on myself, and since it can only proc so often, it's like, well, that's a wasted Hollowfang. I don't need that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, niche sets that are listed on the spreadsheet and, what I would also consider irrelevant heal sets. Like I know Sanctuary's listed, but I don't think any of my raid teams have run Sanctuary in probably close to 2 years. That's your very basic starter set for heals. Mainly because its only benefit is that bigger heal numbers, which that goes along with the ritual Mundus, is we don't need larger heals. We're already healing far more than we need to. And as you get more sets, you can create more varying opportunities for various buffs that we can provide the group. It's just like tank sets. The more sets a tank has, the more opportunity we have for different setups. If we're in a trial with 8 stam tunes, it's great if we can get someone with her scenes on. Not it for a healer to wear her scenes or a tank to wear her scenes, it would have to be jewelry and weapons. Only because I'm pretty sure that's a medium set.
Mm-hmm.
But that would help all our stam users maintain their resources. Torag's pack is great for, if you have Crusher enchants. Martial knowledge increases group DPS. Zen's group DPS. Every set listed here has a benefit to the group other than Sanctuary.
Yeah, I was just checking. I can make every single one of these sets. It's just a matter of having the materials at this point to make them.
Yep. For certification purposes, we don't require any of the unique staffs like Maelstrom, Asylum, Resto, or the BRP staff. They definitely have perks if you know how to use them, but keep in mind that when you do that, you're generally sacrificing a monster set. So whether it's, you're taking away Symphony of Blades, there's no point in running a Resto staff, Master Resto staff, if you're going to lose Symphony of Blades, because Symphony of Blades is already restoring resources. Just to lose that and gain a staff that gives resources doesn't seem very productive. So very few opportunities to actually use the weapon sets.
I think the only time it kind of works out if it's an arena set. So your Master Resto, your Force Overflow, BRP Resto is you have a back bar proc set. So if you're a Roaring Opportunist and Jorvold's healer, then you can proc Roaring Opportunist on your back bar with a heavy attack and then still use your front bar. So it's one possible setup. If you were like the Tomb Healer in VSS is you're running the BRP staff, but you can still have 2 full 5-piece sets because you'll have a back bar proc set instead.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And with some of these, I mean, I would probably call them a little bit more advanced because they require you as a healer to do something a little bit different. So like I know when I was first starting, a big thing for healers was infallible Aether. So that requires, you to constantly be heavy attacking in order to keep that up. It's kind of fallen by the wayside since most groups will run a warden that has Fletcher flies, which provides almost 100% uptime on minor vulnerability. But in the case where, say, you don't have a warden in your group, you might be asked to run something like Infallible Aether. And that requires, that you to constantly be heavy attacking to keep that up. And the same thing with like Roaring Opportunist. I know a lot of us probably already do heavy attacks. But
It caps out at like 16.7%. So it can be.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And it's 2 heavy attacks, so.
Yeah, and Roaring Opportunist can be tricky because you don't want to necessarily use it on your Resto staff bar. To maximize Roaring Opportunist, you want to actually have a fire back bar because heavy attacks will do more damage. And it's based on the amount of damage you do with that weapon during the heavy attack. So if you're doing smaller heavy attacks with, say, a Resto staff or a ice staff, you're not nearly getting the potential buff that you could if you did it with a flame back bar. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that you never want to do a heavy attack with an ice staff because you'll severely piss off your tanks.
It doesn't taunt on heavy attack anymore.
Oh, it doesn't? See, it shows
No,
how much I'd just go
yeah,
on the
it's
assumption. Oh,
yeah,
it's the
You have to have the
damage shield
passive
now.
for it in order for it to work.
It's like
It's under
an
Destro.
ability. It's a specific ability that you have to use. It's like Frost Clench or just one of those. You don't have it morphed, it's the Destructive Touch. One of the morphs of Destructive Touch has the taunt attached to it.
Well, I'm so glad they changed that, but I haven't been paying attention to that, I guess.
Tank brain.
But yeah,
They're
that used
actually
to be
making it better for
terrible.
tanks.
Especially if you pugged a trial and somebody had an ice staff on, you'd spend the entire trial trying to figure out who was taunting.
As soon as you see an ice staff light attack, you're just ready to like rip someone's head off as a tank. You're like, no, couldn't be fighting you the whole time.
Yep.
A Bastion has an ice staff or skill that taunts, and I finally figured that out. So
Yeah,
it's,
if Bastion has a frost staff and he's running the one destructive touch ability, then yeah, he's taunting. If he
yeah,
doesn't have a frost staff, he's not taunting. So um the frost staff can still be useful. Rock Grove, forget what the ad's called, one of the big ones, and it shields up. I can't even remember what it's called now, but when it breaks, it shoots out projectiles at people. So
yeah.
healers could run frost staffs for that instance to blockade spam to give everyone a shield against projectiles, and it kind of helps mitigate something like that. So there's niche uses for maybe a frost staff on a healer, but it doesn't come up very often.
Do any of our more quiet healers have any questions? I'm sure you guys are just listening in, but I want to make sure you guys don't have any questions.
Honestly, I'm too overwhelmed of the information. I
That
don't know.
always
Lot to
tends
take
to be the
in.
case when we do these, is people get overwhelmed, but that's why we decided to record it this time. That way, you can re-listen to an hour's worth of detailed information. We just
Let's.
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was just say
Oh,
like taking off maybe like small chunks. Like it's definitely a lot that's getting covered between like all the different sets and all the different play styles and your classes and how content can kind of dictate your role as a healer and given content. But sometimes, make sure you can keep people alive, make sure you can get your buffs up and kind of track that and practice keeping your buffs up. And if you see them falling off, what can you do to kind of improve that? And then you can start looking at the different sets that you could be wearing and how they pair together and what triggers them to go off and see how you can kind of add that into your repertoire and running dungeons with people or other normal trials or something just to see if you can kind of play around with it, practice and kind of get better at it.
Exactly. And I don't think healing is any different than parsing on a dummy. I've spent hours figuring out good rotations as a healer, just as much as I've spent coming up with good rotations on my DPS.
yeah, for sure. I had a quick question, Blitz, just for clarification, because you mentioned an Inferno staff for RO. Did you mean Stone Talker? Because
Uh,
RO gives Major Slayer after a heavy attack.
yeah, I meant for RO. I believe the time that the Major Slayer stays up for RO is based on the amount of damage you do.
The scaling's a little weird because it can be. I think it still says it's either based off your max magicka or your spell damage.
I
But I've seen
have it
funny
up,
things
yeah.
out there.
Spell damage.
Oh,
Or
well,
6300 magicka you have.
then they changed it on me again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the math
That's
on it is a little. I've also seen someone suggest that it's a combination of the two or whatever. But I know like you can get again there's a roaring opportunities tracker, so you can actually see that you've gotten it on X number of group members. You can kind of see when it's on cooldown and when you can get ready to proc it again. And I still use that set proc tracker to also see how long, like based on the bar I'm on, if I pop a potion to kind of up my spell damage or it's a little weird, but you can get up the max duration you can get is 16.7.
I think one of the hardest parts about being a healer and any support role is keeping up with all the changes.
Mm-hmm. They
You
keep
know, I
they keep
remember a time when healers could literally keep an entire group alive by spamming orbs. Because it
the
used to
orb
be you
train.
could have, an orb train. You could create 7 or
I
8
love
orbs
those
and then
days.
go on to buffing. And those orbs would keep everybody max health all the time. But when that went away, I actually cried a little bit because that made my job really easy.
And then they made orbs go a little bit slower and heals half as often.
Yep. All because the DPS couldn't catch the synergy in time, so they were chasing it around the battlefield. And
So I have a question about roaring opportunists. You have to do a heavy attack twice to get all of your
Yep.
members.
Correct.
Is it a cone like combat prayer, or is it just
It's
people around you?
I did science on it. It is around you, and it's probably about 25 meters, give or
Okay.
take. Because, yeah, I had to science this with my target dummy and had figured out where 28 meters was, and then had, like, I was standing by the target dummy, procced it, couldn't get it on the person I was testing with. They moved ahead a little bit and kind of ballparked, okay, that's about 25
Okay.
meters. So it is around you, so
That's good to know. Okay.
Well, and just to clarify, it can only happen every 22 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's not like you need to heavy attack twice to proc it. It's just the first time you do it, it's going to hit 5-ish random people in that range around you.
yeah,
And
you
22
and
seconds
5
later, it
others.
might hit those same people. It could hit other people.
But if you
You do
do
it
it as
twice to get the full group though. So it's you and 5 other groups, and if you have 5 other people, and then you heavy attack immediately after, and you get the other 6. And then it's just kind of you kind of get used to its timing and when it falls off and when you can proc it again, and then you can get that first group again, and then get the second group again.
Oh, I see what you're
But,
saying. It's once per target every 22 seconds.
Yeah. And I really like to pair that with the Zens on a healer, just
Huh.
because while I'm waiting for the roaring opportunist to fall off, you can be spamming all your dots and keeping those up, and then because Zens is so dot heavy, you find yourself lacking resources, and then I will use those heavy attacks to maintain my magicka.
So you don't pair it with Jorvolds, which increases the duration of all your buffs, debuffs
You
by
could.
40%.
I
Yeah.
personally don't care for Yorvolds. I know a lot of healers speak highly of it, and I know quite a few end tier rating groups that require it. I don't necessarily think it's necessary.
Okay.
If
I
you're
would agree with that for the most case.
if you're keeping up on most of your buffs and keeping the 70 to 80% up on all your buffs as it is, adding a few more seconds sounds great, but I think there's other sets you can be running that would potentially increase DPS further than, say, an extra 4 seconds of Horn or an extra 4 seconds of Major Slayer. Because we're getting Major Slayer from other things as well, whether I think it's Colossus or
that's major
War
vulnerability.
Machine,
War
Master
Machine is
Architect.
one. Yeah.
There's definitely other sets that are, I think, better in most cases than Yorvolts.
Well, Zen may be the next gear set I make.
Zen's is a lot of fun. It's probably one of my favorite healing sets.
There's a good resource with ESO University that lists all the different dots that you could use with it,
Yeah.
that are class based, or say from like Soul Magic or Fighters Guild, or even to like using poisons and stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to get the dots for that, regardless of the class you're playing.
Generally, now I run it on a Templar, so again, my skills might be a little different. But when I run Zens, I use Consuming Trap from Soul Magic. I use Degeneration from Mage's Guild. And then I use Vampire's Bane as a Templar, and Shock Reach or Fire Reach or whatever the element of the staff I have on my back bar. And then I use poisons to get my 5th. And if you're using fire, you're also getting fire damage dot from that elemental effect. So generally speaking, I have 6 ways to keep Zen up at all times. When you only, the max is 5, but if one of those drops,
Yeah, if you can have a
then
6, yeah, you can keep as many because it's capped at 5. But if you have a 6 in the wing, then you can almost guarantee having 5 up at all the time.
So, stepping back, not so much for just a healer, but for group composition, is it good enough to have just one of your players have Zens, or is there value in the healer having it as well?
I always prefer to keep Zens on a healer. Now, the one exception to that rule is if you have a Mage DK in your group, then
Yeah,
try to convince them to run Zens because as a Mage DK, they automatically have 5 dots. They don't
yeah,
have to change their rotation. They don't have to change their setup. They would just say drop false gods and put on Zens, and you could have max uptime on Zens just by having your Mage DK in the group. And then that's less work that your healer has to do because your healer in Zens essentially is, a ninth DPS.
And as for having two people running it, Zach, since it can only apply to each target once, it's not probably super helpful unless you have like a super optimized group that say like splits the, between ads and like
right.
boss or something.
Okay. So, one thing you haven't covered yet is you were going to spend at least some time talking about meeting criteria for getting up to higher ranks.
Fair enough. That we will certainly do that next. So I base it on a few criteria. Now, every healing officer we've ever had has been different and has differing opinions, which in most cases we all work together to figure out if an individual is ready. I know I talk to all the raid leaders, Occam's, Ariana. We all, I believe, started out as healers and made DPS so we could open it up for more healers to join trials, which is why I have DPS. But my main criteria is always buff uptimes. I don't ever look at how much you heal during a trial. It doesn't matter. Generally, tanks will out heal healers just because it takes into account uh, damage shields, or the numbers are immediately skewed if a healer hits barrier. Suddenly, you were healing 120,000 damage a second. Like, your actual healing numbers do not matter to me. I base it off of buff up times, preventable deaths, so anything other than a one shot. You know, how did that healer perform in VCR? Do we have a lot of dot damage in the group killing people? Um, Maw is another good example. And then, once I take into account all those numbers, I try to set up a trial where that healer can then come and I will run Zens and Roaring Opportunists. Or in some cases, I've been known to just take a coffee break and I will walk away from my computer and see if you can heal in VAA by yourself. And if you can keep up and you don't get stressed out, and you don't panic, and everybody doesn't die, then generally speaking, you meet our standards. Now, to go into more detail on standards, we have to keep a huge eye on your actual survivability. You know, if you as a healer spend more time hugging the ground, then that's going to put us in a terrible position. You know, you can't buff, you can't heal if you're dead. So the first thing I implore all healers to work on is keeping themselves alive. You know, once you've mastered not dying in the trial, then you can focus on keeping everybody else alive, keeping your buff up times, uh, knowing what's next and being more proactive rather than reactive. You know, reactive healers don't last very long in an ESO because with 50% of all damage being a one shot, it means that, you know, you got a 1 in 2 chance of dying. But if you can keep your buff up times up and prevent damage as it's occurring rather than 2 seconds later, where they've had now 2 seconds worth of opportunities of taking damage, then everybody's survivability will be increased. Everybody's damage will be increased. Every time someone dies, someone else has to stop, whether it's stop healing or stop DPSing, to res you as a healer. For the set requirements for healers, it varies depending on the situation and essentially how hard up for healers are we. Ideally, I would like you to have at least 4 or 5 sets off the list before we make you a shield breaker. Just because being a shield breaker means that you're gonna have plenty of opportunities where you're paired up with a healer that might only have one setup. You know, I only have SPC and Sanctuary. Well, that means that the other healer needs to make up for those losses by wearing, you know, maybe 2 harder to get sets or, you know. So by having as many of those sets off the list before we make you a shield breaker makes it easier on forming trials. If you get 2 healers that sign up and their only set is SPC and Sanctuary, that's going to make it harder for that group to clear stuff. Does that make sense?
Makes eminent sense, yeah.
Ariana, Gremlin, you guys got anything to add?
I was just going to reiterate. I mean, you might have seen my dressing room setup. Just I have 5 out of my 6 setups all have shields on them. I mean, it can really make the difference. Kind of going into that proactive thing. I mean, if you can shield up when you know something's coming. Like if I'm kite healing in VCR, there's just constant damage from the little spewers that come up, the orbs that come up. You got the laser you're running around from. Hoarfrost sometimes is running wild, and so you're taking damage from that. If I can just hit a shield and, you know, combat per myself, stand in my own ritual, you know, keep buffs up on group, that can make the difference between, you know, surviving and dying.
Yeah, generally speaking, in most veteran trials, if you die, DPS are going to follow. Because while we do tell you that healing is not your biggest concern, you do make the difference between, you know, someone taking 3 hits and getting healed up or getting hit 3 times and then possibly dying shortly thereafter. Especially, you know, when you look at Cloud Rest, it becomes a real hassle. If a support role dies in Cloud Rest, chances are it's going to be a wipe. Maw, it'll be a wipe. It's really hard to res healers while you're taking constant damage, no matter how small that constant damage is. And, you know, when it comes to healing in trials, you'll probably spend most of your time actually healing the tank, which is their job. They're going to take lots of damage. You know, they have one job, and that's to take that damage. Which means that while a lot of good tanks can sustain extended periods of time without heals, they'll need resources. And if you're dead, chances are they're not going to get those resources. And that's why they will die.
I think because my kind of thoughts on as far as like your healing, like how much healing output you have and your uptime and stuff, as someone who did start this game as a tank and spent better part of my time playing as a tank, having a good healer that can help keep me alive means I'm spending less of my own resources trying to either shield to mitigate damage or healing myself because it's exhaustive and it burns through my resources pretty quickly. So having a good reliable healer that's kind of keeping the heals out on myself and the group is nice to see. So I'm kind of when I'm looking at logs from like when I've been in trials and like to kind of gauge how I'm doing, I am looking for my own uptimes, but I'm also looking to see if I am pulling my weight for healing the group. If I'm falling behind, if the tank's really doing that much healing, depending on the content, I feel a little bad because I know they're expending a lot of resources to do that. So I do like to see pretty good healing output. That means you're kind of alleviating that strain off other players. So if your DPS does have to spend more time like shielding up and self-healing in content where if they had heals underneath them when hot's going, then
That's an excellent point.
yeah. So I'm kind of combination of both. Is that I do like to see pretty good healing output, and then, but I also try to look to see, okay, what do your bars look like? What sets are you wearing? How are your uptimes working out? Um, and if something's kind of gone awry, if I see a low healing output, it's like, okay, what's going on? I kind of end up looking at replays to kind of see where are you in relation to your group? What are abilities are you like casting? Are you letting things drop off a little bit too much or
And a lot of it comes down to getting in the practice. We, in Incurable Insanity, don't turn people away just because they don't have experience. We will certainly train you, but you also have to put in the time and the practice to become, for lack of a better term, a household name. You know, most of the healers here, with the exception of Evan and I think Gremlin, I think I have hand trained. None of us were great healers when we started. I remember when Ariana was terrible, or when Crooner came and the only skill he ever used was Healing Springs. But before Crooner's departure, he was probably the guild's greatest healer. It's all about the time and effort you put into getting better. And the more effort you show, the more effort we'll show into even increasing you further. Eventually it'll be on you to train the next generation of healers. Because I can't do it forever. I've been trying to pawn off the healer certification process for a long time. Zach, Zen, you guys got any further questions?
I, I just have a comment about some of the discussion here, specifically Ellie Drain. There are several raid leaders that insist on you having that up 100%, or else you're not doing your job. This isn't another guild. I just sort of chuckle when you say that other stuff's more important.
Every single guild is different on what they
Yeah,
require. You
yeah,
know, especially if you raid in more than one guild, you'll find that the requirements are always going to be different. I personally only run with Incurable Insanity now, but I used to run with Wipes on Trash, and I've ran with TRE before, and each setup has increasingly harder requirements or different
yeah.
biases. So you just got to base it on essentially what your raid leader tells you. Because unfortunately, and I will preach this until the day I die, your raid leader is always going to be right. Unfortunately.
Well, I really respect the role that they take on. It's a lot of responsibility, a lot of call outs. Um, and so, no, I agree with
you know, Even if we're wrong, unfortunately, the truth is if we make a bad call and wipe the group, yes, it's our fault, but we will always accept that responsibility. But if we ask you to do something, it's because that's what we think is the best call. So if your raid leader is saying, we want 100% uptime on Ellie Drain, then that's what I would shoot for. Just know that here at Incurable Insanity, we don't require you to necessarily run it. Now, we might ask you to run it, and in that case, yes, we want as high of uptime as possible. But every trial and every raid team is going to be different.
Yeah, on the trial that I was doing just before yours last night, I had it up 98% of the time.
Not bad at all.
But also, I was group heals on the Flame Dragon and trying to provide resources to the tanks, etc. And that was a lot of button pushing. But anyhow, I really appreciate you doing this. This has been fantastic for me. I've really learned a lot. Thank you.
Not a problem. I'm gonna try to do these as often as time allows. It's definitely harder to carve out an hour and a half, 2 hours on a weekend when I work all the time. But if you ever have questions, don't be afraid to whisper me or shoot me a Discord message. I know Ariana and Gremlin, I don't think they have a problem with accepting messages either.
Absolutely not.
If you're a warden, I believe, Gremlin, you have a warden, right?
I have all of them.
I have all of them too, but I
But yeah,
prefer my Templar over my warden.
yeah. I tend to prefer my warden and then my necro, and I kind of am iffy about my Templar just because the others tend to be a little bit more fun. But yeah, I prefer my warden for sure.
So Zach, I know you play a warden, so if you have any questions, don't be afraid to hit Gremlin up. We made
Oh,
her a Valkyrie for a reason. She's easily one of the best wardens we've ever had in the guild.
she's already given me some great guidance. So, not only about the skills, but also in VCR positioning, how to really play the kite healer role there.
I hate the kite healer role.
I love it for whatever
It's
reason.
so
I like kite
boring.
healing
Fun and
as well.
stressful.
I
Yeah.
I find it absolutely boring. You just run around in circles, and when a spear comes up, you push the spear into the ground.
Yeah, well, it's I'm trying to also give the group resources and buffs, and uh,
It's quite a bit sometimes to be aware of, like especially when you get into like progging +3, because there's chances where it's like, oh shit, I just got flares, the Maja just ported, that means crushing's incoming, so somehow I have to time this so A, I don't die, but also that I get into the group and crushing doesn't follow me like immediately in. So
yeah, yeah.
I've
I
had it
know.
go both ways where I dragged crushing into group and was waiting there for it to go off, and then the other time I just missed getting into group and died. But twice
Now,
so far I've gotten it.
when it comes to the kite healer getting roaring flare, I know a lot of groups that have 2 dedicated DPS that are trained to run back to the healer instead of bringing that shit in a group. So that might be a viable option. Just train your DPS. But ultimately, guys, that's all I got for you. And if there's no other questions, then we'll end it here. If you have questions, don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'll probably have more specific questions when I start running more like specific trials like kite healing and group healing on VCR and other stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And when it comes to those, if I'm your raid leader, I'll certainly train you. But if I'm not your raid leader, just ask your raid leader. All our raid leaders have pretty much played all the positions. I'm not sure if Occam's has ever tanked VCR,
Oh,
but who
he's trying.
knows?
He's getting there.
You know, for the most part, all our raid leaders are trained, at least know how to do all the positions. That way they can actually train if need be. I know Angie has never healed, but she knows how to do it because Angie does excellent training runs. I do not do very good training runs. just because I generally don't have the patience to train people inside trials.
Hmm.
I'm good before and after and during. I can tell you what to do, but I find it strugglesome to teach new players sometimes while leading content.
Yeah.
So I do have one last question. I have a Templar healer, which I like. I really like my Warden, and I'm getting that knowledge up and skills up. What about a Necro healer? Is there value in having that as well? Is there content where
So
that's more
Yep.
valuable?
every
Mhm.
Okay.
class, with the exception of DK healers,
Yeah.
have a great bonus in their group. You know, it goes back to what Ariana said: is we try to pair healers with what they can bring to the group. You don't need necessarily two warden healers in a group because they're going to
Yeah.
offer the same bonuses. You know, minor toughness. Uh, I like to pair a warden and a necro, a templar and a warden. Generally, templars and wardens have really strong group heals where you can throw a nightblade healer or a necro healer as the kite tank in VCR. They can still provide bonuses to the group with their class passives and their class buffs, with the exception of, like I said, DKs. There's very few moments where I've said, wow, I really want a DK healer in my group. I hear they're great in dungeons, but otherwise, overall, useless in my book. Just my thought. Nightblades are also really good healers as well.
And I had a question. So when most of the time, like when I am in a raid, my up times are way like less than I like feel like. Well, they're less than they are on the trial dummy. That's normal, right? And is it normal to test your up times on certain things on a trial dummy, or should you only really look at them from when you raid?
I generally only look at them in raid logs, but I don't
Okay.
know how others feel about that.
I think raid logs are a little bit more meaningful to me anyway, like
Yeah.
representative of like how you're actually able to manage, because you got to account for how
Yeah.
your group and how you're really reacting in content. If you're just standing in front of a raid dummy, like, I mean, you're just standing there and doing things. It's easier, it's less stressful, but how you
Hmm.
carry yourself in content, how you react to how your group is positioning, and making sure you're kind of in the right spot to kind of optimize those buffs and debuffs and keeping track of them. Like raid logs, I find are a little bit more meaningful,
Yeah, I
just
Okay.
like
think
a
I
purse
think
or
it's
something.
exactly like a DPS parse, right? Is you can show me a parse where you did 91k on a parse,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be proud of you and think that you're awesome. But if you go into a trial, chances are you're not going to ever hit that 91k. And
Yeah.
that's just because you're moving. You don't have perfect buff up times. Well, the same thing is going to go for healers. You're going
Hmm.
to be moving around. You're going to be avoiding damage. You're going to be repositioning all the time. So
Hmm.
while we do expect you to have moderately high uptimes on your buffs, we're never going to berate you for not having 100%
Yeah.
because we know that's not viable.
And a bit of that's going to come down to like, especially if you're learning the content, you're learning the role. It takes a little bit, and like with practice, you do start to understand the content a little bit more, and you react a little bit differently, and you know where you can be and when, or knowing that the boss is going to yeet over to the other side. Um, you're going to have to move your heels. The group is going to move in a certain way, stack in a certain way, and it's going to impact a lot of that.
Yeah.
But
A lot of your buff up times are going to get higher with more experience. And as you know, there's quite a few of us healers that also play DPS. That also helps because you know what it's like to be on the ground. You know,
Hmm.
it gives me huge anxiety when I play my tank because I know what I'm like as a healer and what I would provide the tank. And if I don't get that same result, it starts to eat at my brain.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think if you DPS, like it kind of gives you that mindset of because you're all about your uptimes and like you can stay on top of that, then you're maximizing your damage and you're not typically overcasting because then you're wasting resources. And healing is a little bit similar. Like you want to try and keep your your skills up, keep your heals up, um, keep your buffs and debuffs up, and you really do see it in the same way with a rotation. And like it's gotten more and more to that point that when I hop on my healer, I'm light attack weaving. When I started out as a healer, I wasn't really doing that as much, but now it's like it's just my hand is just light attack weaving as I'm casting skills, and I'm more mindful of my up times because I'm watching them now because I have the action duration reminder, and it's just yeah,
Yeah.
definitely you learn and you definitely get better over time, and as you get more comfortable with the class, the role, and the content, you just get better.
Mm-hmm.
Again, feel free to reach out to any of our healers, whether they're Shield Breaker or Valkyrie or their officers. Everyone will be open to help you. We also have the healer channel in our Discord where you're always welcome to ask questions, and it becomes then a dialogue because you don't know if two people have the same question, just one might be afraid to ask it. So we definitely encourage you to ask questions there as well. If you want to inquire on how to become a shield breaker and go into more detail on what you have, what we require from you, shoot me a private message. I know I just saw one from Zek who wants to become a shield breaker, so we'll definitely, take a look at that. Um, and we'll get that process started for you, Zek, and that goes for anybody here that wants to become a shield breaker. Of course, with the exception of Ariana and Graham, unless you guys want to get demoted. I mean, if that's what you want, I'm not going to stop you. You'll probably lose your health insurance.
Oh dear.
So,
Oh damn.
yeah, it also comes with a pay cut.
Wait, getting paid?
Oh, yeah, in feelings, I appreciate you being a Valkyrie. I mean, I'm just kidding. Alright guys, I'm gonna end the video and thank you all for contributing, whether it was asking questions, going over information, and just being here. I wouldn't do this if I didn't think people would show up. So helping healers, push their content is my goal. You know, most of you get a message from me when you join Discord. Hey, what are your goals? What do you want to do? Incurable Insanity wants to help you with that. Whether it's DPS, heals, or tanks, whether it's running trials, groups, we want you to achieve the best out of playing this game without being elitist twat waffles. And sometimes that's hard. Various trials have gotten more intense. You know, we've become a little bit more militaristic when it comes to running some of the harder content because that's what's required. And we don't want to be elitist, nor do we think we're being elitist. But if you ever feel that we are, pipe up. We'll probably tell you to shut up. But, your feelings matter to Angie, who's head of HR and leader of the guild. So,
And even militaristic isn't even probably the right word. It's probably just more organized.
yes.
And we do that out of respect for everyone in any groups that we're in. Whether that's starting and stopping on time. I mean, that's so people aren't waiting around for 3 hours. If we get it through in the time, that's great. If we don't, real life is important.
Yep.
And it's the same with picking content that we think that group is capable of. So it's not any fun to be in a group where you're just constantly banging your head against a wall. So sometimes that does, require us to ask members to put in a little bit of work. And I think to echo what Blitz has always said, we're willing to put in the amount of work that you put in. And people that put in the work, should get reap the benefits of their work. So
Yeah, and for those that are interested on whether it's DPSing, healing, or tanking a core team, you know, that comes with an equal responsibility. Is our goal is to get you through that content so you can get that clear and experience success, but it most certainly requires work on your end. I can't tell you how many core teams I've been on where they think it's just a carry. None of our Incurable Insanity core teams can be carries because what I would consider us to be an end game trials guild, we don't necessarily have the numbers or the full capabilities of some of the higher end raid teams. We have to do strategies. And all our strategies are based off the core teams that we've created. You know, I know what our group is capable of, and we will use strategies generated based on what we have available to us. I would love to stack the dinos up and just burn them. I would love to run VAS +2 and keep the minions up. But that's not viable for us, so it becomes a 35-minute fight that is micromanaged beyond all belief. But alright, guys, I'm going to call it here. Thank you all for coming, listening to me and Ariana and Gremlin talk, and thank you for all your questions.